everyone. Welcome to Here We Are, Brattleboro's community talk show. I'm Wendy O'Connell, and today on our show we have Elena Harap Dodd. Elena is a writer, performer, and teacher who keeps equity and diversity at the heart of all of her endeavors. From the Integrated People's Theater of Cambridge in the mid-60s to her solo performance of Eleanor Roosevelt that she has performed worldwide, to co-founding the writing and performing ensemble Streetfeet Women, Elena always looks to bring the more inclusive story to audiences. Welcome, Elena.
Thank you.
Wonderful to have you on the show.
Yeah,
We're
my
happy.
pleasure.
You've got a lot of stories to tell, and a lot of good ones. And going way back, you were actually the daughter of two immigrants, both your mother and your dad.
Right. My mother was born here, but her folks came from England. And my father was born in Galicia, which is part of Ukraine now, and they came around, both of them came around the 1900, beginning of the 20th century.
Yes, and you grew up in Ohio, is that right?
No, I was born there, and my father had a one-year job, and then he was hired by Peabody College in Nashville, Tennessee, and I was, I think, about a month old when we moved there, and that's where I spent my childhood, in the South.
In the South, and then you came to Boston for college.
Yes.
Yeah. And when you were growing up in Nashville, I know that you did some music, you were interested in playing the flute, and what other things were interesting to you back then?
Well, I guess I should talk about my experience with the Nashville Youth Orchestra, where I was a flutist, because it really changed how I saw the oppression of racism in the South. I think maybe I kind of accepted that there were these, there was segregation, but there was an effort to change that and accept black students into what was then an all-white youth orchestra. And it went into as far as actually auditioning black students, at which point the board of the parent group, Nashville Symphony, decided they did not want integration. And it was up to me and my peers to say to our colleagues, our black colleagues, we can't keep you in this orchestra. And I feel now that what I didn't understand is that I should have stood with them and resigned from the orchestra. And what I see now also is that there was no chance for violin players or people who wanted to learn the orchestra repertoire if you were black in Nashville. You could be in band, you could play jazz, you could have a teacher for string instruments, but if you wanted to go to conservatory, your white colleagues would have had years of playing that orchestra repertoire. And so it was essentially closed.
Yes, it was.
And it's changed now, but we ran into that, and my mother was actually worried that because of my involvement, it might have impacted my father's job. It didn't, but
all kinds of things back then. All kinds of influence.
It was dangerous.
Yes, and you also, though, were involved with something called the World Interest Club.
Yeah, I was very lucky that a family friend who was white lived on the campus of a historically black college, Fisk University in Nashville, and she just decided, she was a Quaker and an activist, and she decided she wanted to bring girls from across the color lines together in a small club. And we called it the World Interest Club. We cooked together. I guess we discussed world affairs. I mostly remember making a dish, I think it was a French meal that we made onion soup and things like that.
Oh, that's so interesting.
And we met at her house. So I have to say, that was one place where you could bring groups together where otherwise it was pretty, it was segregated.
Yes.
My school was segregated, my church was segregated, my neighborhood was segregated.
It's amazing that you had that as a place to come together. I think that's
yeah,
actually
she made that happen.
Yeah.
So she was a mentor and is still, Marian Fuson, still a role model at the age of 90.
Yep, never too late to be a role model. When you got to Boston, I know we're jumping ahead a little bit, you got very involved in theater and community theater.
Yeah, I fell for theater at the same time that I was getting married to Ted Dodd, because he had a friend who was helping start something called People's Theater of Cambridge. So we're talking 65, about 64, 65. That was a time when people who were concerned were looking for ways to bring together black and white groups and other, but particularly, I would say, the African Americans and Anglo-American Caucasian types. So this retired speech teacher from Tufts University spoke up at a seminar, and she said, I would like to start an integrated theater group. And the YWCA adult department head said, I will help you. And so at the YWCA in Cambridge, Massachusetts, was born this little group.
Wonderful.
And Ted and I were in both of us. He very soon found he wasn't that interested in being an actor. He built beautiful sets and did tech. But I fell in love with acting and started taking lessons and working towards finding a way that I thought I could maybe do it to gain income. It didn't happen right away. Even when we moved here, I looked all around, and there were extremely good actors who were doing very good theater, but it was all volunteer.
Right.
And I complained to my teacher, Josephine Lane, and she said, write your own show and I'll help you. And that was the beginning of doing the character of Eleanor Roosevelt.
Oh, interesting. That's interesting. So she mentored you in that project?
Yeah, you know, we looked at Zelda Fitzgerald, we looked at Clara Schumann, the wife of Robert Schumann, Amelia Earhart, Margaret Sanger, and one day she said, well, don't tell me this has been done to death. What would you think of Eleanor Roosevelt? And Eleanor was a character in my life, or at least FDR was. My parents were ardent Democrats. And later I found out that my friend and mentor, Josephine's father, admired Eleanor, and he told her mother, well, she can put her shoes under my bed anytime. And her mother would say, oh, Arthur. So we just started reading, and we started researching. And we began to look for ways that she could be vulnerable, that she also, and she had a habit of sort of being able to make fun of herself. So we used that. And we tried to bring her to, as a human being, to the audience.
Yes. Well, I love what you say. You talk about going beyond the icon of Eleanor.
Exactly.
I think her humanity always showed, but when you say bringing in humor and that kind of thing to make her more relational,
Yeah, and to let people know that as a child she suffered a lot of losses. It was not unusual. Her mother died of diphtheria. She was 8, I think, and her father, who suffered from alcoholism, didn't really live with them very much. So she was kind of a lonely kid, and she evolved into this social, compassionate woman and first lady.
Yeah, you know, and I wonder, Elena, if you could talk a little bit. I know that you'd started theater. You know, that was back in the early '60s, I'm guessing, in Cambridge.
About 65.
Yeah, and then that's right, 65, and then moving forward into Eleanor. And I know you've done other things. Could you talk a little bit about getting into character and what that's like for you? And I think, as you say, beyond the icon with Eleanor. What is it getting underneath in there?
I relied a lot on my teacher to try to find, part of it would be try to find parallels in my life that might remind me, let's say Eleanor was she was very dependent on her mother-in-law, for example. So I would try to think how I related to my mother-in-law, what that meant to me. What were some of the others? It was a process, I think, of finding some parallels and then making her experience your own. And it took me many years to really feel I could do that. And I think Jo Lane was very, she was patient she, for instance, told me, bring your notes. You don't have to memorize this script right away. I eventually did. And of course, we wrote it ourselves. So she said, if you make a mistake, nobody's going to know because we wrote it. But there were many ways. I had a music stand. It was built by my husband, Ted. She said, hold on to that stand if you feel you're not grounded. And there were techniques that allowed me to start to feel comfortable, because that's a very important part. If the audience doesn't think you're having a good time and you're very happy to see them,
Yes.
Then they will not have a good time.
Yeah. And you were carrying the whole show. When you were doing Eleanor, that was a solo performance.
It's interesting, yeah. On one hand, you don't have other actors to support you, but then you do have a kind of control, and I guess you would say you play with the audience.
Yeah.
And I think I'd like to say how much they helped me. Not so much the kids in a different way, but when I was with an older group, mostly they would be people who had some memory, and the memories that were like in the air probably filled in all the gaps.
Yeah.
And so in that way, I would say it made my work a lot easier.
That's a very interesting observation. You're correct. I'm sure you know that it
And
was.
I would know, because then they would tell me stories. I would open up, I would take off my hat, and bow, and they would go, oh, she's not really Eleanor Roosevelt. And then I would ask them if they would like to share a story. And
Yes.
I don't think it ever failed. There was someone who met her either in Campobello or in Washington, D.C. We decided that we could build a house on land that belonged to my father-in-law, Ed Dodd. And Ted really loved Putney and the woods. And we made a move from the inner city,
Yeah.
Boston, to Putney.
Did Ted go to school at Putney School?
For 2 years he did, yes.
Yes, so he had that influence and that
Yeah,
connection.
yeah, he was a homie sort of already.
Yes. And your father-in-law was the second president, I believe, of Dodd Mead
And
Publishers.
Let's see, it went back to his, I think it was even one more generation, but anyway, yeah,
1800s.
it was his family's company,
Yes.
Dodd Mead
Yes.
Publishing.
Which is no longer.
And I'm sorry
Sadly,
to say,
sadly.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's, a lot of things made the publishing business a lot more difficult to maintain.
It's changed.
And it wasn't something Ted chose to do. He's a hand person, and he became a really master carpenter.
Yeah. So much of what you do is about equity and inclusion, and I know that once you got here in Putney, you did different things. You worked with some of the teachers in Putney and 4-H. Claire Oglesby at Westminster West School, I know a lot of people know of her. There's a wonderful documentary done about her as well. It was really
World in Claire's Classroom.
Yes,
Now,
yes.
Claire is a good example, another role model in a way, because the neighborhood had different cultures, but it didn't include a lot of Asian or African American culture. So she brought it into her classroom through projects and through inviting different visitors to come. And in my case, I guess I was interested in African folk tales, and I also wanted to teach the kids to tell stories. And so then we invited a wonderful doll maker, she was, and later sculptor, to come and work with the kids who was African American. And by that time, I have to tie in, Ted and I also had helped start a school in a black neighborhood in Roxbury through my friend Angela Cook. So Angela and her husband Joe brought drummers from their school to the show that we were having, and they stayed with kids from Westminster West School, and then they drummed before the show that we gave.
That sounds fabulous.
So we were able to weave some of that.
Yeah, Claire was very
experience.
forward-thinking and very, she had a very wide vision.
She was a trailblazer.
Yes.
4-H,
Yes.
I would say what we tried to do was to bring people from the community. We did Heidi, and we found a man named Judd Hall who raised goats. And I don't know how I did it, really. I prevailed on him to come and play the grandfather. And he was a natural. And Jessica Taylor did Heidi, and I think Abby Coven did Clara.
Uh-huh.
So we made it as if it were in Putney,
Yeah.
or a Vermont town.
Yeah.
And Clara was from Boston, and she was sick and she was in a wheelchair. And I remember she talks to her friends, and they say, "Oh, you have to come in and see the trillium." And she said, "What's that?" They say, "Oh, it's a new flower. It's the flower in the spring, and it smells like wet dogs." So there were a lot of things that the kids brought in.
Oh, great.
That became part of the show.
Yeah, that's wonderful. That must have been fun.
It was so fulfilling.
Yeah. And you enjoy teaching as well as performing in school.
So then, I used a lot of what I had learned from teachers in Boston, improv particularly, and that was a fun way to learn to work together as an ensemble.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. But you continue teaching. Teaching has sort of been a thread.
I guess so. My father was, both my parents taught, and my several family members, including now my daughter. But I went ahead and began getting excited about writing. I went to a workshop with Lori Alberts, who is in our community. And at some point, I think I have to say, I wrote an essay, and she called me up. She said, "This is goddamn gorgeous. You've got to go to and get your master's degree in this program I'm teaching in." And I went into the garden and I started to cry, because I think it was something that I hadn't really realized it was going to be very important to me.
Yeah.
So I went ahead and worked on the personal essay, or creative nonfiction, and found that I had very remarkable teacher mentors in a low residency program. It's now called Vermont College of the Fine Arts. And so after that, I think it seemed to me I wanted to figure out a way to pass on a lot of what I had learned, and to encourage women to write and to honor their experience and their creativity. And that turned into going back to Boston for a period of time. Both my husband and I moved back for a while, and I found out that there were some grants I could get. So I started a workshop in the same library where I had, in my earlier time in that neighborhood, had done some shows with children, and also some Amal and the Night Visitors, the opera. And so I designed it as a workshop for women. I said, you didn't really have to have any experience. As long as everybody was respectful, we would get you to write at whatever highest level you could. And we ended up with, again, a real variety of cultures, not only African American, Euro-American, but Boston is a hospital place. There was someone who was Japanese, or her husband was a doctor, I think. And so we drew. Again, it didn't even seem to be that difficult to do.
Yeah, interesting.
But we made it a point of welcoming and being excited about whatever people brought in.
So you had a very culturally diverse group of women.
Yes, we did.
Yes.
And it still is. I hope it will always be.
Did this segue into Streetfeet Women?
Streetfeet segued from the children's workshops that I did, starting in about 70, let's see, Angie was maybe 72 or 3. It was a project that I guess what I would say, I had young children and I still wanted to get involved. So I did some street theater. Boston at that time had something called Summer Thing. And so I applied to do Summer Thing. And again, that was with Angela Cook, who later started Page Academy. So after it had started and it was a children's show, the librarian, the libraries keep coming in, said, I want you to see if you can do something for Women's History Week. It was just a week. And I wrote some poems and had, well, I guess I started with Mary McCullough, who I knew, it was sort of from People's Theater that started. And then it became clear that the Streetfeet Women's Company, it was called, had more things they wanted to say and do. And then I heard that there was going to be a UN conference on women. This was in Kenya in 1985. And so that grew really from People's Theater to the Streetfeet Children's Workshops to the Streetfeet Women. But it's still going. So
yes, and you're still part of it, and you're a very active group as well.
Right.
Streetfeet Women have been around, I think, since early 80s.
82.
82.
Yes.
So it's over 40 years, which is hard to believe.
Almost.
Yes, and I know that I think you mentioned that one of your focuses was to show the diversity of American women.
Right, and that was our motivation going to that first conference in Nairobi, that when you look on the street, when we look, on Mission Hill, American women look brown and white and different colors and different cultures and different languages. So we figured out a piece we called Many Voices, and it brought all of our different I guess you'd say our different talents and a persona on stage together.
Yes, and your backgrounds, of course, and your heritage all being different.
But we really wanted the international audience to see that all of us represent Americans.
America, yes.
Do I have time to tell you a story about? Our director was an African American, Linda Patton, and her husband came along and he helped us out. When we traveled, they thought we were his wives. And he had a red head, he had a black one, he had, a blonde one, and we just had to laugh.
You were very diverse,
yes.
but all under one umbrella.
And they figured, well, he has a lot of women.
Right, it was working for him. So let's talk about your new project. You've got a new book that's coming out. Streetfeet Women has a new book coming out.
Yes, Metaphors Are Not Enough is the name of it.
Good title.
The theme that we've been talking about is the voices are very different, and they also express themselves in different ways. We have a couple of really good poets, so they're contributing poems. Lee Min is contributing more personal memoir, and I'm also contributing prose essays. And Mary is contributing some scripts because she's become a respected playwright in Boston. And one of our newer members, Andrea Humphrey, is contributing excerpts from a novel. So you're seeing a lot of genres that seem to, for each of us, have attracted us.
Where can people get the book? Will it be here? Will it be local?
Oh yeah, so it's at Everyone's. Good. Definitely, and it's in Bellows Falls. It's at I think it's the Village Square.
Village Square, yeah.
Yeah, and you can check with Antidote in Putney and in Wilmington. Oh dear, I've forgotten the.
Bartleby's?
Yes,
Bartleby's in Wilmington, yes.
Yeah.
Well, that, it's great. We have all of these independent bookstores that are alive and well.
Yeah.
It's quite remarkable. So yes, folks,
it is wonderful.
If you need to buy a book, and you can go on down and get Elena's book at any of these independent bookstores. When you were acting, especially in acting, I guess, did you find things that you recognized in yourself? You mentioned Eleanor. But also, and not just performance, with teaching as well, those kinds of interactions.
Right. I think that one reason, in the end, my teacher would say, you have aptitude, but you don't really have talent for acting. I didn't want to hear it, but I think I understood it, that I came from a fairly reserved way of expressing myself. So I probably, I could never have done Zelda Fitzgerald or a volatile character. Eleanor herself is very reserved, and that's not to say she has deep feelings. So that worked for me.
Yeah.
But I think that and I've had a lot of fun doing other shows, but I would say I don't have a range that would maybe have made me a better actor. And in the end, it seemed to me, as I began to write, I felt very energized by writing, and I hope that I can kindle that in the people that I teach.
Right. Yes. And you know, looking back at the things that you've done and where you came from and all of that, what are the things that that just make you happy?
Well,
remembering.
Going out on the street with my tin whistle, which I would play, and sitting down with a whole bunch of children and telling a story that they would act out.
Ah.
I found that just really a happy time.
Yeah.
So that was an example. And I would say moments when I knew that Eleanor was just kind of speaking. I had the words, but she was really sharing herself with the audience. Would have been a very fulfilling time. Yeah. And then I would have to say, having my children was a really happy time.
Yes, yes. And your kids, have they gone on to do performing or writing?
I think that Angie has done some theater, but what she does in her teaching is storytelling. She uses a technique that means they have to use their imagination, and she does too, all the time. Oh, nice. There's no text, yeah. So that she is a creator in that way. And my son turned out to have a very strong artistic ability, mm-hmm. and went to Rhode Island School of Design. Mm-hmm. So now he's doing portraits. He's also a massage therapist, so he's very interested in the anatomy and what he does, but and also he uses it when he draws.
Uh-huh. Yes.
So I would say they are pretty creative.
All these things that you've done, and thank you so much for sharing your stories with us today.
Thanks for listening.
It was really fun to hear them. It's just so many great pieces that you bring together. Do you have any parting words for us?
I think that what I would like to talk about is what I believe is the civic culture, something that seems to me is a thread through what I care about. Mm-hmm. And what that means is that when all the different streams of culture that go up to make a community come together and are respected, and they contribute whatever they bring, you get a much, much richer community life. It's a healthier way than to deny any one culture. And so I think that's just something I hope for. And as I think I was saying in Putney, that we finally worked on the idea of equity and inclusion, and I hope that our culture will reflect all of that.
Well, those are very hopeful and helpful words. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Elena, for being on the show with us.
It's been a pleasure.
It has been a pleasure.
I have asked that we dedicate this show to the memory of Angela Burkfield, a champion of social justice. I just would like to honor Angela's life.
Thank you. Yes. We appreciate that, and we join in with you with that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll miss her.
Yeah. Thank you, everyone in the audience, for joining us today and for listening to Elena's stories and all kinds of great and fun information. So tune in again. We will be back with another guest. We are so glad that you came in today to be part of this. Be well, be healthy, be kind, and we will see you again soon.